They say that a devil may cry himself to sleep every night for a decade, waiting for Capcom to give him another game. And now that he's got one, he can finally stop crying and get off the fucking couch. I'd like to think I'm a relatively decent Devil May Cry fan. Well, at least a decent enough fan to ruin a perfectly good pair of pants when DMC5 got announced, and also pre-ordered it online so I could play it first thing when midnight struck on the date of release, and also spent my entire spring break last semester playing through the game from beginning to end. Make of all that what you will. For a while I had the idea of doing a review of DMC5 alone, but later I thought, that'd be boring as shit. So later on I had the idea of giving my 2 cents on every game that the series has seen thus far, all in one go in a marathon review, starting with the original game and going through each one based on release order. Devil May Cry is home to quite a few interesting peaks and valleys, and this does make every game in the series at least interesting to talk about and dissect, whether good or bad or pizza dick. I decided to replay each game in the series to have a more refreshed outlook on them, and in general just to get my thoughts on each game as accurate as I can. I didn't do any of the higher difficulties, nor did I do any of the bloody palaces. This is all just normal base game stuff. Sorry if you were expecting or wanting to see some epic gamer skills, but I sadly will not be delivering on that front because I suck. Also, I figured this video was probably going to be kinda lengthy, so I decided to split it up into 2 parts. Part 1 is going to be on DMCs 1, 2, and 3, while Part 2 is going to be on DMC4, the reboot, and DMC5. Just gonna get that out of the way real quick. Anyways, let's dive right in.
This party's getting crazy. Let's rock.
We're beginning with the first game to ever bear the title of Devil May Cry, Devil May Cry, the game that started it all and paved the way for 3D hack and slashes to become what they are today. Nowadays, DMC1 can best be summed up as, yep, that was definitely the first game. Development history for this game is kinda weird. It was originally supposed to be a Resident Evil title, specifically an early version of 4 and what they intended on being the first RE game to be released on 6th generation console hardware. Of course, it turned out to be neither because the ideas and general tone of the game were pretty jarring for Resident Evil at the time. I bring up the development history because you can really see a lot of what was left over from the game initially being a Resi game. The fixed camera angles, the large creepy setting you explore, the puzzles, it even ends with a timed escape sequence. The game stars a Hot Topic model with white hair named Dante, whom they were originally going to name Tony Redgrave. They realized that name was stupid and nobody would ever take it seriously, so they instead named him after that guy who escaped from hell in a book one time. Some lady then busts through a wall like Kool-Aid Man, which, funny enough, wouldn't be the last time this happens in Devil May Cry. She starts off fighting Dante and then tells him about some demon named Mundus whom Dante's father fought a long time ago. Apparently Mundus has plans to return to the human world to conquer it or destroy it or something, so they go to some place called Malay Island to put a stop to it. I'd question why Dante is trusting this information from some random lady who busted into a shop and tried to kill him, but I'm busy questioning why he trusts some idiot who's wearing sunglasses inside and at night. That's simultaneously really dangerous and something only a complete and utter tool would do. The combat in Devil May Cry is heavily centered around pulling off different combos and attacks to kill enemies, while also looking cool as you do so. There's the standard press attack button multiple times combo, but a lot of your other attacks are triggered by either pausing in between button presses or attacking as you walk forward or backward when locked onto an enemy. For example, attacking while holding back on the left analog stick will allow you to launch an enemy up into the air along with yourself if you hold down the button, and attacking while holding the stick forward will allow you to perform a powerful thrust attack called Stinger, ostensibly named after all of the mean things people will yell at you if you spam the move like a baby. There's a stylish rank in combat that goes all the way from D to S, dependent on how often you attack the enemies, the sequence in which you use different varying attacks, and whether you've avoided getting hit or not. Guns are also a thing, but they're mostly just a tool for you to keep combos and style ranks going. You obtain more melee and ranged weapons as you go through the game. Personally, I'm a giant shill for the gauntlet weapons, so anything like that is always good in my books. You can buy more attacks in the shop with red orbs, along with items that restore your health and devil trigger bars, increase both of their sizes, kill all on-screen enemies, or make you invincible for a bit. It's a relatively solid combat system for the time, even if it is pretty damn basic compared to later outings. It's laid out concisely, and the enemy variety always shakes things up enough to be fun. All that stuff is pretty good. A bunch of other shit blows ass though. For one, this camera deserves to be thrown into a furnace because, oh my god. Fixed camera angles fit in action games less than Pepto-Bismol fits into a bowl of cereal. At least in classic Resident Evil, you're always running forward depending on which way you've turned with the tank controls, and it's not being thrown off by the changing camera angle. In Devil May Cry, you have full axis movement, and the camera shifting really throws off which way you're running. You still walk a specific direction for as long as you hold the stick that way, but upon changing camera angles, once you move that stick to a different direction, the game freaks out. It's so confusing because you're always trying to piece together where you are in the new camera view compared to the old one. Enemy attacks have a frequent tendency to come at you from off screen with no effective way to see them coming, most egregiously during the Griffin bosses. It's just cheap and annoying. The game has these really bizarre segments that just change up the gameplay for no reason at all. A couple missions force you into this first-person underwater bullshit that controls like crap and restricts you to some gun that only exists for these pointless segments. The visual effect used here is so uncomfortable to look at. It has this distorted, wavy look that doesn't even look professional. I'm pretty sure things don't actually look like this underwater. I mean, I've done swim team for 3 years of high school and have been swimming for most of my fucking life, and I never saw anything look like this during any of the countless times I've been underwater. The first phase of the final boss has this crappy flying segment with half normal, half inverted controls, and the plane segment at the end is slippery yet so easy to get through that if you somehow die during it, you're probably making a conscious effort to fuck up. That or you're actually just asleep. Wake up. The bosses in-game are pretty hit or miss. Phantom's a decent challenge, Nilo Angelo's an enjoyable one-on-one battle, and I liked 2 of the 3 Griffin battles when the camera's not being a bitch and a half. At the same time, the second Griffin boss is a game design disaster, the final boss is and Nightmare, I refuse to believe was designed by somebody in a proper mental state because, oh god, this is awful. Also, the plot's really stupid. It's a totally confused mess that doesn't really know what it wants to be. It tries to simultaneously be straight up action, serious drama, and suspenseful, but it doesn't really succeed at being any of them. It's not a good action story because everything feels stilted and awkward. It's not a good drama because the dialogue is poorly written and the acting is so bad it's funny. There's a reason why the Fill Your Dark Soul with Light moment is a prime example of how bad video game voice acting could get back then. And it's not good at suspense because nothing in the game feels remotely threatening or scary. There's also this whole thing about Trish backstabbing Dante because apparently Mundus created her or something, and Dante still decides to save her life because she looks like his mom. It's stupid and goes nowhere. The only bit of storytelling I find legitimately interesting is the bit with Nilo Angelo actually being Dante's brother Virgil, but even then, that's mostly just a result of what later games have done with this character. On its own, it's still the most interesting aspect of the story, but that's a bigger non-accomplishment than passing PE. A lot of the game's issues are probably a result of it being the first in its series, and they were probably just spitballing ideas, so I don't want to be too harsh on issues that have long since been corrected. Even then, the first installments for other hack-and-slash juggernauts are way better in comparison to DMC's first outing. I know it was a pioneer in its genre, and it laid out the groundwork for similar games like Bayonetta, God of War, and 3D Ninja Gaiden, but still, DMC 1 is kinda rough. It laid out the groundwork, but it by no means perfected it, if you get what I mean. I wouldn't call it an outright bad game, I still have a good amount of fun playing through it, but it's hard to recommend this one. For all I know, the game was probably a masterpiece for its time, but its time has long since passed. If you're just now getting into Devil May Cry, I'd say it's a decent place to start, but if you've played the more recent games, I feel like you probably wouldn't enjoy this. Approach the first game with caution, I guess. It's bad. Normally, I'd just pretend that Devil May Cry 2 doesn't exist. Unfortunately, it does exist, and it makes me want to die. This is one of the most mentally draining and demoralizing games I've ever subjected myself to. As a follow-up to the original Devil May Cry, it's really unsatisfying, and as a standalone action game, it's a total misfire. It's difficult to find a place to even start with this game, but I suppose I'll begin with the guns being overpowered. The most effective combat strategy in Devil May Cry 2 is locking onto an enemy, backing up 200 miles, and repeatedly filling them with bullets until they drop dead, or you drop dead from sheer mind-numbing boredom. Pretty much anything can be dispatched of this way because your starting pistols can single-handedly juggle enemies in the air non-stop, and they have a pretty sufficient damage output. It's actually encouraged in a lot of cases because many of the enemies and bosses either really like to keep their distance or hang up in the air where melee combat makes me want to ingest gasoline and swallow a match. I tried to do melee combat, not because it was the more viable option, it never was, but so I could get footage of something that was slightly more interesting to look at than me just firing guns non-stop. It was probably wasted effort, but I tried. All it did was make me further realize that the basic fighting mechanics are also garbage. There's like one combo, and that's it. Well, one you'll actually bother to use, which is furiously beating the triangle button to the point where it's probably filing domestic abuse charges against me. Combat's not fun, especially when your attacks are about as weighty and impactful as a YouTube apology video. I don't know whether to chalk it up to weak sound design or half-assed animations or just the general clunky feel of the game, but you just feel so weak throughout the entire runtime. But that's okay. To compensate for this, the enemies don't put up a fight because the AI is stupid. They just stand out in the open doing nothing and taking forever to think that maybe they should probably try to attack me. I theorize that they're waiting to be slaughtered so they can escape the eternal prison that DMC2 is for them. Part of what makes the combat in Devil May Cry challenging is that the areas where you fight enemies are always closed in, whether they be small rooms or narrow hallways. They force you up close and personal with your opposition, utilizing the limited space around you to fight them all and dodge attacks when needed. Essentially, you need to account for where you're fighting in conjunction with who or what you're fighting. So naturally, DMC2 fucks this up as well. There's so much wide open, empty, dead space where there's nothing stopping you from backing up and shooting all opposition. Also, this brings me to one of my biggest gaming pet peeves: large, pointless, empty space. You do so much running around these shitty, oversized environments accomplishing nothing at all. The levels don't even look appealing, they're bland and drab. I guess the people behind the game's art direction have an allergic reaction to any color that's not some shade of brown. I mean, come on guys, the 7th console generation was only a couple years away, color was still in. You could have waited a bit before making a game look this uninspired. I mean, for as dated as the first game is, it at least looks nice. DMC2 is just ugly because of the color palette and because the lighting is abysmal. Why is this game so dark? Why can I not see anything? This isn't a horror game, so turn on a light. As bad as the camera could be in the first game, DMC2's camera is so much worse. It addresses none of the problems from the first game's camera, in fact, they're even worse this time around. Also, large environments plus camera you can't rotate equals I want to die. The bosses are such a perfect culmination of everything wrong with this game, I'm honestly kind of impressed. There's giant building guy who you beat by shooting endlessly, some idiot with a hammer who you beat by shooting endlessly, some idiot with 2 wrecking balls attached to his arms who you beat by shooting endlessly, some idiot floating head guys who you beat by shooting endlessly, and a monkey. Also, you fight tanks in a helicopter, because that's what you want to fight in a game about killing demons, military artillery. Oh, but let's not forget about that weapon variety. You can attack with a sword, a bigger sword, and a dinky-ass sword that I never used. This is the only Devil May Cry game that doesn't have gauntlet weapons, so it would already be the worst one by default for that reason, but this game is just a rabbit hole that keeps going deeper and deeper. There's 2 stories you play through. One is Dante, and one is some new girl named Lucia. They're both abysmal. Lucia's story is at least shorter than Dante's, but she's somehow less fun to play as, and the game throws water levels into her campaign that are somehow even worse than the ones from the first game. Her backstory is the one interesting aspect of the game's plot, which, surprise surprise, is also really bad, but it's not worth playing as her because it's just all of Dante's levels recycled. The game's already bad enough to play just once, playing it 2 times is just torture at that point. Honestly, I'd probably just dispose of my copy of the game, but I have it on the HD collection where it attaches itself to 2 other good games like a Parasite. However, back in late May, I went to Atlanta, Georgia to attend MomoCon 2019. A few things happened there. One, Rabid Luigi caught me on camera shit-talking Kentucky. I live in nowhere and nobody gives 2 shits about... It's good. Nobody gives 2 shits about Kentucky. 2, I yelled at some guy in the distance who was shouting about JoJo. Shut up! 3, a couple people there actually recognized me from YouTube, which was pretty cool and I'm glad I got to meet them. And 4, I just so happened to find an original PS2 copy of Devil May Cry 2 for about $5. I bought it for the express purpose of cathartically smashing it with a hammer. So yeah, here's me destroying the game. Yep, I don't think anybody's gonna be playing this ever again. Oh shit. Oh, yeah, that disc is completely fucked. Holy shit. That's just disc 1. Is disc 2 still intact? It's okay. We might still be able to play as Lucia. Is there hope? Well, well, it survived most of the blunt, but looks like, yeah, it's a fucking dent right here. Holy shit, yeah. I don't think anybody's gonna be playing this anymore, so, oops. Look, there's even fucking tiny-ass pieces inside the bag. Holy shit. While I give DMC1 a cautious recommendation, don't even bother with 2. You're not missing anything. After how big a disaster DMC2 was, I would have been content with Devil May Cry 3 just being decent. Turns out it was one of the best games ever made. When bringing up Devil May Cry, the third game, Dante's Awakening, is most likely the first thing that comes to a lot of people's minds. It's essentially the Devil May Cry equivalent of a game like Mega Man 2 or Silent Hill 2, where while it's not the first in its franchise and maybe not even the best depending on who you ask, it's definitely the most recognizable game to fans and even outsiders. DMC3's been one of my all-time favorite games ever since I first played it a few years back, and none of that adoration has faded a single bit. Even if over time I've started to notice a few blemishes here and there. I feel like DMC3 is where Capcom really started figuring out what they even wanted Devil May Cry to be. The first 2 games felt pretty indecisive on what direction they wanted to take, while Dante's Awakening embraces over-the-top action with full confidence and stride. It harkens back to the overall design of the first game, with all of the levels being tight and compact, drawing you into close proximity with the enemies. Though Dante's Awakening does a fair bit to advance all the groundwork that the first game laid out. For one, the combat feels a lot more fast-paced and snappy, which makes it all the more exciting to pick up and play. Everything just feels a lot more smooth and natural. The core combat has all the additions you'd expect, like more combos added to your standard moveset, but the biggest addition comes in the form of combat styles. Depending on which one you have equipped at the moment, you'll get additional moves exclusive to that specific style. It's a great addition to the game that lets you customize your own playstyle based on what you prefer to do. If you're mainly focused on being more defensive, then Trickster is what you're gonna stick with, while for a more aggressive playstyle, you'd be better off utilizing something like Royal Guard. Though after playing through 4 and 5, the style mechanic does feel a bit rough during its debut in this game. You're only able to use one style at a time, and you'll have to equip it before the start of a mission, only being able to switch to a different style at one of the goddess statues. That, combined with the styles leveling up the more you use them, really doesn't encourage a lot of experimentation. You'll probably just end up sticking with one style throughout the entire game because you'll risk losing a potential upgrade from trying a different style. It doesn't ruin the game by any means, but it's just kinda jarring to go back to after all the tweaks made to how Dante plays in later games. Looking past that, the game's still damn fun to play. They really stepped up the enemy variety in 3, throwing in several uniquely designed demons that behave differently and have their own fighting strategies. If the mindless square and triangle mashing in DMC2 burned your thumb to a crisp, which I'm about 250% sure it did, DMC3 will absolutely restore your faith in humanity, which will probably be destroyed 5 minutes later by something else anyways, but hey, 5 minutes is still better than 0. Unless you're Security Hall, the way you get new weapons is kinda similar to how it works in a Mega Man game. After beating a specific boss, you obtain a new weapon in your arsenal based around the one you just beat. The weapon variety is pretty damn cool. Definitely a huge step above the first 2 games. You got ice nunchucks, dual blades based around wind and fire, an electric guitar in more ways than one, and of course the ever so vital gauntlet weapons. I could nitpick the occasional crappy mission or annoying boss, but for every one of the few annoying bits in the game, there are so many great bits that make any of the weaker parts easy to overlook. The final boss in particular is super goddamn good. It's hack and slash gameplay at some of its absolute finest. For the first time in the series, the story doesn't suck. It's a prequel to the entire saga, focusing on a much younger Dante and the quest he went on that would inevitably shape him into who he is later in the timeline. They gave Dante more character and personality than just a boring dude who says a one-liner sometimes. Of course, there's all his goofy and dorky antics which are great, but he's a lot more complex a character than just that. Carrying both the human blood of his mother Eva and the demonic blood of his father Sparda, to put it simply, Dante embraces mom's side of the family more than dad's. His arc throughout the game is about him coming to grips grips with his demonic heritage and understanding the kind of person his father really was. Going from resenting his father's very existence at the start to embracing the fact that he is a son of Sparda in both his bloodline and his responsibility in protecting the world from demons. Realizing that Dad was more than just some powerful warrior from the underworld, but somebody who was noble and felt genuine compassion for all living things. Whereas Dante's brother Virgil is, by stark contrast, much colder and fully embracing his demonic side while disregarding humanity as weak. Most of the fighting between Dante and Virgil isn't entirely about stopping the other, though that certainly plays a part in it, but it's due to their ideologies and the paths they went down being totally opposite. This is what makes their conflict so interesting. It's not just good twin versus evil twin, but two complicated people who do care about each other deep down, even if they impale each other all the time. The other two major characters are great on top of that. Lady is a seriously kick-ass new addition to the main cast, and her father Arkham is a damn good villain. He goes from unsettling to goofy as all hell with his jester persona, and he's ungodly good at thinking everything through and finding out how to manipulate the main cast on top of that. It's just a really fun story that has a ton of moments that hit surprisingly hard. Really, my biggest complaint with the game is that Virgil's story is basically Dante's recycled with a couple new cutscenes and a new character to play as. Virgil's awesome, and I love playing as him, but some original missions would have been nice, you know? That aside, I really don't have any other complaints. I just love this game to death, it's so damn good. DMC3 cemented itself as one of the all-time greats from the hack and slash genre, and it's well earned its reputation. Bit of a shame the camera's still kinda crap though. Oh well.